Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So today we got some more OTA leaks that the developers have actually decided to confirm this time. So that's neat. We're going to talk about them, but I really want to focus on one card in particular, and that is Aero. So Aero is probably my favorite card in Snap. Really loved playing her back in the day. Even after her first initial nerf, I still really enjoyed playing this card. But as time went on and she got some more changes, I feel like the card just really fell out of favor. And even for someone like me who really enjoys playing it, it's just really hard to justify finding space for her in pretty much any deck right now. So when I heard there was an Aero buff coming with this OTA tomorrow, I was really excited. And then I saw the buff and I was a bit less excited. Is it good that the card is getting an extra point of power? Yeah, it's going from a 5/9 to a 5/10. And as mentioned in the developer notes, one of the things surrounding this is like they're taking a point away from Mockingbird, so they wanted to buff up another card to help out the Scar decks, and Aero happens to be that card. I do think there are some applications there that I will show on the screen here in a minute, but it really disappoints me that they haven't thought about revisiting their stance on moving unrevealed cards. So many people probably don't know or forget about this, but a while ago they made a change to the move mechanic where they basically stripped every card of its ability to move unrevealed cards except for Juggernaut. Juggernaut gets to be the special one that breaks the rule. And I always thought it was bullshit that they only let one card do that. And their original logic for making this change, I think, is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard, which was, well, people were getting confused about the fact that they couldn't destroy unflipped cards, but they could move unrevealed cards. It's like, yeah, those are two different mechanics. It doesn't really correlate at all, the fact that you can do one thing with them and not another thing with them, because they're two different things. It's just so stupid, and I really feel like it's one in a long line of examples that shows they really cater to the lowest common denominator of like their player base with some of these changes that they make, claiming to be like, oh, we're trying to make things less confusing. But the ironic thing here is when they changed Aero, they made Aero more confusing for the average player, because what Aero did before was always very consistent. It was always moving the last card played that turn. And now what Aero does varies drastically depending on who has priority. If you have priority, it's going to move the last card they played last turn. And if the opponent has priority, it's going to move the last card they played that turn. And while it sounds simple on the surface, it's something I've seen people mess up over and over again. It's something I've even messed up as like a very experienced player. It's just one of those things where it is by no means actually simpler and easier to understand, especially to this quote-unquote average player that they're trying to make this change around. So I will die on the hill that this card should go back to the way it used to be, where it used to be able to move an unflipped card. If Juggernaut can have an exception, I promise you, Second Dinner, your player base has more than 2 brain cells. They can understand that more than one card can have such an exception. I'm also in the camp that they could even go back to her original ability with a lower stat line, but I know it's a bit hotter of a take, so I'm not going to focus too much on that. Regardless, I'm happy to see it getting a buff, even if it is not particularly the buff I would have liked to see to this card. And so far, the places I think will be interesting to try this out in are a Black Knight deck featuring the Scar package, as well as kind of an updated version on the current Scar deck, which I think is actually one of the best decks in the game at the time of putting this out. Obviously, Mockingbird no longer being a 6/10 going down to 6/9 does hurt the efficiency of it a bit, but Mockingbird is still a really, really strong card, so I think you still run it in the deck regardless. Especially when there are some, locations that can buffer back up to the 6/10, so you can still get Scar synergy some of the time. But Aero just being, a decent effect on a 5/10 that gives you another big body to help reduce the Scar seems good to me. Also lets us get away with putting in Miles Morales in that kind of deck. It was already running Hydra Bob initially, so now we have 2 ways to reduce Miles, and even if you only get Scar down to a 2 cost, it enables some interesting final turns where you can go like Miles for 1, Scar for 2, and then Cosmo for 3, which I think is a pretty big power play on the final turn of the game. The Black Knight deck I'm a little bit less sure on. There are some other buffs coming to that deck in this patch. We are having Ghost Rider go to a 4/4 and Black Cat go to a 4/10. So more Scar support. I'm not even sure you actually need to run Black Knight in this deck. It's possible it really isn't necessary, but I do think having a little bit of redundancy and getting more of the big dudes down so you can get Scar down for cheaper probably isn't a bad thing, and sometimes that can't be destroyed effect on the Ebony Blade can come in handy as well. So that was definitely the change I was most excited to see, even though it's not my favorite change or my favorite way they could have changed Aero. I am happy nonetheless that they are finally doing something to help bring this card up to speed a little bit. And on top of that, next month we're getting Scream, which seems like a really, really good synergistic card for all these cards that care about moving your opponent's cards around. So maybe this buff combined with Scream next month can finally give Aero a little bit more time to shine again. With that out of the way, let's quickly talk about some of the other changes that happened in this patch. Sandman got a bit of a rework, and I think most people are probably not super surprised by this. They've had a trend of hitting the cards that restrict things pretty hard and kind of reworking them to be less annoying, I guess. So Sandman going from a 5/6, players can only play one card next turn, to a 5/7. Next turn, cards cost one more, maximum 6. Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm not huge on this change, but I also think Sandman was a decent release valve against these like decks that try and spam a lot of cards. I know a lot of people don't like that, and I mean, I think Sandman still is going to be annoying for those decks, so he is still kind of trying to do the same thing, but he isn't hard limiting. Like, you can still play your cards, but you know, if you're trying to spam out a million cards with bounce, you're probably still going to be annoyed by this effect. Overall, I think it's a fine change, Overall, though, I think it's a fine change, even though it's one I'm not particularly fond of. Mockingbird is probably going to be the one that gets most people's attention, especially since she was just in Spotlight Caches recently. Everyone's like, hey, go get this card, and they nerfed the card. I mean, I'm not super surprised to see as Mockingbird has been one of the strongest cards in the game for a while now. It still will remain one of the strongest cards in the game, I think, for a while. The only really downside here is, well, it's just not going to be giving Scar that additional support that it was previously, which does matter. It is funny to see in the OTA notes, they actually call out like the community perception of, well, you know, now that she can duck Shang-Chi, it's actually better. And it's like, will there be cases where it is better? Sure. But I do think people sometimes underestimate, like, 1 point of power can be the difference maker. So in general, very light nerf, just a little bit harsher on the decks that are running her with Scar. I still expect this card to be very powerful and played in a lot of decks though. Black Cat and Ghost Rider both getting an additional point of power. Little scary, not gonna lie, especially Black Cat, because if you don't know, Black Swan and Hellcow are going to be getting Activate. They might also get stat changes. We don't know that. It's not happening with the OTA, but we are getting a patch next week on Tuesday, and I would imagine that is when those changes are going to make their way into the game. So buffing Black Cat ahead of that and then giving Hellcow Activate, well, don't be too surprised when Hella rears her head again next week. I think Hella is actually going to be incredibly scary, depending on how the Hellcow Activate change goes. And getting an additional point of power with Black Cat is a nice bonus on top of it. Ghost Rider, similar kind of thing, although I don't think you're going to see this really in Hella decks, but they're trying to breathe a little more life into this card. Will it do it? I don't know, but I'm interested to try it, especially in the Aero deck I showed previously. I do still think, though, that Ghost Rider is going to continue to be a little limited until they find a proper resolution for making Zabu a more playable card. Moon Girl going to a 4/5. Not much to say about this one. The 4/4 stat line was just a classic, like, early Marvel Snap stat line that cannot hold up in the environment we're currently in. And frankly, I don't really think a 4/5 is actually going to hold up super well either. I think they could have been a little more risky with this card. They said they tried it at 3 and it was busted, and I can believe that, but I think they could have at least gone for like a 4/6 or something. Presently, I just don't really see the incentive for playing Moon Girl with this additional +1. And then War Machine. I think this is up there with Mockingbird as probably the most impactful of the changes from this patch, going from a on reveal to an ongoing. This is a really big buff. They actually mentioned they tried 3/5 War Machine with Activate. It didn't work out how they had liked. I know a lot of people have suggested activate. I thought it wasn't a bad idea either. But this just seems strictly even stronger than that, because this fixes War Machine's biggest issue. Oftentimes, you want to play War Machine and then follow up with like a big Infinite. And for you to be able to do that, you had to play War Machine on 5, and it wasn't very good. And now you can just play War Machine on turn 4, and you still get the effect. So that's huge. That is a very, very big buff to this card. And I really love to see it because I think it's a cool idea for an effect that just has never really found much success. So as far as buffs go, I think this is maybe the best one of the patch. And then Agatha. This is one I think nobody saw coming. So Agatha no longer is going to play your cards for you every turn of the game. Now she is going to play your cards for you only on even turns. So turn 2, turn 4, turn 6. Agatha will be playing your cards. Very, very interesting change here. They even mentioned like the Agatha show coming up, so they wanted to breathe a little more life into this card. And I think the people who use Agatha to just endlessly farm Season Pass XP will probably be a little upset now they have to commit some manual actions. But I think in terms of making Agatha a more interesting card to like build around and play with, this is actually a pretty big W. The one thing I actually find quite scary with something like this is I think a lot of people don't consider how in a 12 card deck game, getting to start with an extra resource in hand is a really, really big advantage. That was kind of offset by the fact that Agatha made really, really bad plays. But now that you can interact with your plays half of the time to have a bit more control over the outcomes, I think there could be something real here. I mean, I don't think it's going to be something top tier or whatever, but I remember I used to have a lot of fun in the past playing a kind of neat Agatha Hela deck. And with this change, I'm kind of interested in re-exploring that archetype again. So, overall thoughts on the OTA. I think in terms of like addressing or changing the meta, it doesn't do very much, but they also said they're generally kind of happy with where the metagame is and nothing seems like a crazy outlier. So that is, I think, kind of a reasonable approach to take if that is their opinion on the current metagame. I'm sure some will disagree with that, but I guess I can see it. I do wish they went a little bit harder with some of the buffs. I think 1 point of power, though it is often underrated how much that actually can help a card. I don't know if it's enough to actually help a lot of the cards that have been gifted it here, but really do like seeing the War Machine change. I think that's really good. And I'm interested in seeing what the Agatha and Aero changes have an impact on in deck building and whatnot. So yeah, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Reminder, OTA goes live tomorrow, but these notes were shared early by the developers because, well, they can't seem to get a hold of all the leaking going on internally. So kind of funny, is what it is. Let me know what you think about it in the comments below, and that's going to wrap it up for this one. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.